this computer. And I'm just going to wait so that I can see our lovely faces on Facebook, on the Facebook. And let me have a look here. Yes, we are or should be live. Oh, I can hear myself in the background.
Me too.
That was like a double echo, wasn't it? Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is Friday the 13th. Ooh. I should have done that on Halloween, shouldn't I, Steve? That was such a better sound effect for Halloween.
No, because you'd have wanted to dress up and that would have been disastrous.
You know, I was thinking about this morning, Steve. So Christmas is around the corner. And no, seriously, Steve, Christmas is around the corner, and it almost feels as though, well, it almost feels as though it's not going to be the same this year, almost, because, you know, the PM could announce on the 4th of December that the lockdown has been lifted. So I was wondering whether we should wear Christmassy tops during our December sessions. Just a suggestion. You can say no, of course. It would hurt my feelings so much.
You want an answer, don't you?
Ideally, because we're live, and so you can't really say no, because it would mean you're really mean. And I think
no, you can wear your gownless evening strap complete with feather boa. I will be wearing something very similar to this rather smart outfit that I've got on now, which
is really smart.
Beige and black. So, yeah, go for it.
We've still got time. I think I might be able to convince you. So good morning, everyone. It is Friday the 13th. I'm Jaff with the wonderful Steve. Episode 11, welcome, Steve. Everybody.
Yeah, and they said it would never last. No, the bromance goes on, as my partner tells me.
Oh, that's lovely of her to say that. I also hint a sense of, I wouldn't say jealousy, but envy, perhaps. Yeah. Or she's just like, no. She's just like, you two get over it. You two do it.
It's pretty much that, but Jaff, it's pretty much that, mate.
Oh, bless her. Okay, so episode 11, and we'll get straight into it, Steve. I think we
should.
I think I've waffled long enough. I've waffled for 3 whole minutes there, which isn't quite as long as my normal waffle. Over to you, Steve.
Now, aren't you?
Over to you, Steve, for our game, please. Our wonderful opener starter game.
Okie dokie. Well, I'm just going to keep it short this morning because I know you want to read a large chunk of War and Peace, is it? Or I know you've got a massive story lined up for us, which is great because I love stories. So we'll just do a quick warm up. We'll do it based around those brain button stuffs that we've done before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we'll just do 3 parts of that, and the 4th part, the meditation-y bit, can be the story.
Fab.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
So,
great.
Folks, if you've got a glass of something damp, have a mouthful of that. And then what I'd like you to do is, if you imagine, put your fingers in a sort of pistol shape on one hand. Find your collarbone that goes across the top of your chest, and the breastbone that goes down the middle, and just where those two meet, either side. So just either side of that button, you'll find 2 little hollows. Just give them a rub. Okay, so the idea is that by doing this, we're freeing up energy, an energy meridian, is that the word? That goes up and down our bodies. So you might need some brain power this morning, so here we go. Okay, when you've done that a bit, swap hands, exactly the same places, just give it a rub. Jaff, you're getting really expert at this. It's good to see.
It's really nice, really lovely.
Good. Okay, so when you've done that, what I'd like you to do is just stand up. And what we're going to do is a little bit of cross-body movement. So right arm,
this is the bit
leg.
that I always get confused about. So right arm, left leg. There we are.
And then left arm, right leg. And then just alternate that. So we're getting both sides of our body moving. And in moving our body and our muscles, what we do is we start kind of generating some energy and some circulation of our blood. And as we do it a little bit more, you can put a little bit of a twist in, or you can start speeding up a little bit, or you can do both.
Ooh, Steve, you are an expert at that.
Yeah.
I'm just about being able to do the cross-body movements. Ooh.
When Kath and I are doing this in a training group, by now she's bouncing around the room, waving her arms around.
She is, I can imagine. Yep.
It's very undignified, but it seems to work for her. Okie dokie. Okay, so that should get some blood moving, some energy flowing. So grab yourselves a seat again and take another swig.
Ooh, a call coming through.
Oh, how rude. Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, good.
Over to you, Jeff.
So good. So we'll move on to the second part of our typical Friday morning ritual, which is a little story. And so I'm just going to ask you to get into a position that's right for you. And you might want to listen to this story with your eyes open or your eyes closed. And I thought on this episode 11, it would be nice to just read you a bit more of a longer story this morning. And whatever meaning you take from it is absolutely right for you. So this story is called The King and the Statues. And it's from a story by Debs Newbold. For those of you that want to look it up afterwards, please do. So once upon a time, there was a good and wise king. His justice and understanding were the stuff of legends, and he ruled in a way that allowed his subjects to flourish at the things they did best. His kingdom was, in short, a happy place. The king loved to have a puzzle to solve, and he paid well for anyone who could come up with a problem that he couldn't work out. However, because he had been around for a while, he found it harder and harder to come across a riddle that was equal to his own mighty intelligence. So imagine his surprise when one day a parcel was delivered to the palace, and inside the parcel were 4 identical statues. They were all human figures, beautifully worked in the finest materials and lifelike in every degree and detail. They were even beautifully crafted ear holes, nostrils, and belly buttons. The king was delighted, and even more so when he found a note in the box. The note read, "These statues are alike in every detail except one. Find the difference or lose your kingdom." The note had no name or signature, and there was no other way to identify the sender. Despite the threat, the king was confident that the riddle would hold no problems for a man like himself. So he set to examining the statues in detail. He looked at their faces and all around their heads, even counting every hair. He examined their bodies and hands using a microscope to measure the length of their fingernails. For weeks, he set them in front of him and he mediated on their construction and the meaning of their riddle. He became obsessed, and as often happens when folk become obsessed with just one thing, they don't notice other stuff happening around them, even when other people try to tell them. He decided that he needed a new perspective and remembered that he employed a wise man to advise him in difficult cases. He called the wise man to him. Now, here was a man who had spent his entire life studying. He had more university degrees than people have thimbles. He lived in a room full of books, and people said he had read each one 1,000 times. As well as being full of knowledge, he was also full of himself. He was the kind of man who would spend his life when he wasn't reading his books, looking down his nose on others, who he felt were less intelligent than he was. He also grew a long, thin beard that he liked to stroke when he wanted people to know he was thinking. Frankly, he had a knack of really pissing people off. He swept into the throne room and listened to the king's problem while he stroked at his beard. He knew that he had a whole bunch of stuff more than the king knew, and he also knew that the king knew it too. He was confident that this little riddle would be easy. He also knew that when he solved it, he would get a huge reward that would help him pay off his massive student loan from all of his study. In silence, he spent hours examining the figures in great detail. He had a huge magnifying glass that he used to compare every nook and cranny of all 4 statues. Still, He couldn't find anything different between the statues. He hated to admit defeat, and knowing that it was nearly time for cash in the attic, he told the king he needed to go away and think, and then slithered back to his room in despair. The king was kind and knew that the wise man had been defeated. He wasn't sure what to do next until he saw his daughter, the princess, in the garden. He adored his daughter. She had a dead mother's beauty, and she was kind, charming, and polite with everyone. Everyone, that is, except her dad. With him, it was different. She was rude, ungrateful, and disrespectful, and only wanted to spend time with him when she needed cash. She was what we now call a teenager. Her father had tried to work out things with her. When she was 16, he had thrown a massive party for all of her friends. He had paid a fortune for a favourite bard, Poop Doggy Doo-Doo, to come to the castle and do a private gig. He even tried dressing in the fashionable style of her male friends. This had ended badly in when he had gone to the party dressed in a new Nike codpiece that was far too tight. She had refused to be seen in the throne room with him, and for a week or two afterwards, he had found sitting down an uncomfortable experience. It seemed that everything that the king did to win her favour was doomed. He was also wise enough to know that when she screamed at him, he didn't understand her. She was right. "What the hell?" she yelled at him when he asked her to join him. He had explained the problem to her, but he couldn't help feeling that she really wasn't listening. He had given her a new smartphone for her birthday, a decision he now regretted because it gave her another way in which to ignore him. "Well," he asked, "what do you think?" "Whatever," she replied, and was just about to slink off to update her status on FaceScroll when a thought struck her. "There is one thing," she said. Anything," her dad replied, full of hope. "I need a top-up. £10, now." The king was close to despair when his fool dropped by to see him. As fools go, this one was particularly foolish. They say there's one born every minute, so clearly they must have saved hours to get him. Born on April's Fool Day, nature had not been kind to the fool, and he was the only fool in history to be kicked out of the amalgamated union of fools for, well, foolishness. Once he had managed to work out how to use the door to the throne room and discovered from tripping over the light switch, he came capering up to the king, dressed in a fool's outfit, which was covered in bells, which at least gave people a chance to get out of his way. The fool did not fill the king with confidence, but what the hell, he thought, I might as well. So he poured out the tale of the statues to the fool. To his credit, the fool listened carefully, although as he did so, a guard had to take back one of the statues that the fool wanted to chew on. However, when the king asked the fool what he thought, the fool got up and somersaulted out of the throne room. He could hear the music from Cash in the attic coming from the wise man's room, and TV seemed more fun than listening to some old guy in a crown. Despair settled on the king for real this time. He took his statues and locked himself away in the highest room, in the highest tower, at the highest point of the palace. He didn't sleep, he seldom ate, and never washed. And he stayed there for weeks gazing at his statues, or looking out across his kingdom. He felt defeated and very worried that he was about to lose his lands. Trouble was, he had no idea how to solve the problem. It's strange, isn't it? But when you worry about something so much, it's like you seem to attract the very thing you're trying to avoid. This happened to this king. His kingdom started to wither away. He was no longer in charge because of his obsession with the statues, so nobody made those important decisions that had kept his kingdom running so smoothly and happily. The whole place very quickly became a bit faded. It was like all the fun and colour and laughter had drained away to be replaced with about 50 shades of grey. Then, one day, a young woman, steeped in the ways of magic, arrived at the palace. She had heard of the king's problems and decided to help. A shabby, faded guard let the magician into the tower room, and she was shocked at the state her ruler had gotten into. Apart from anything else, the fact that he hadn't washed for a while meant there was something about the atmosphere in the room that made her eyes water. Still, she listened to what the king had to say, examined the statues, and told him that she could help, but what she needed were 4 hairs from his long, dirty beard. He let her pull the hairs out, and she picked up the first statue. The magician took one of these hairs and did a bizarre thing. She pushed it into the statue's ear, where it disappeared. She took a second statue and another hair. This time, when she tried to push the hair in, it wouldn't go no matter what she tried. The king was by now getting very interested, especially when the hair for the third statue went in one ear and straight out the other. Then the magician took the last statue, and this time the hair went in the ear and came out of the statue's mouth, except that it went in straight and grey and came out curly and bright green. How did you do that? The king asked. I've been worrying about this for months. It's really not hard, replied the magician. I do a lot of work helping people to sort out their lives. In my job, I come across 4 diverse types of people. The first type is a bit like your wise man. They love learning and education and soak up information like sponges. The problem is they're not really wise because they have no idea how to use what they know to help others. So it stays inside their heads and is no use at all. The king nodded and made a note to himself to replace the wise man as soon as Cash in the Attic had finished. The second group are a real nightmare, the magician continued, because no matter how well you try to teach them or how good your work is, they just won't let any of it in. Does this remind you of anyone? The king reflected on his relationship with his daughter and noted grimly to himself. Okay, the magician said, now we get on to group number 3. These are the people who seem to take things in, but honestly, it goes in one ear and out the other because they either can't or won't learn. The king wondered what had made him think talking to the fool would help him out in any way at all. But the magician was still speaking. The last group of people are my favorite because they are able to take the information in, use it, process it, give it a twist, add a bit of color, and most importantly, share it with others. And I suppose you're in this last group, eh? The king said a little sarcastically. Of course, the magician replied. And on a good day, so are you. But, she went on, you have let things slip recently, and now the kingdom is in a mess because people have told you what's happening and you've been so wrapped up in this silly puzzle that you either haven't heard them, or if you have, you've done nothing about it and kept it to yourself. Wake up, your majesty. Smell the mead and get your finger out. The king was impressed, even if this young woman was being a little rude and overfamiliar. He looked over her carefully and noticed that she was doing the same thing to him. They both liked what they saw. Maybe, the king said, you could stick around for a while and help me sort out the mess? And maybe I will, the magician replied. But first, you have just got to take a bath. So welcome back, everyone.
Nice one, Jaff.
And a little longer than usual. And at the same time, I think there is something just really magical in that story. Something just really, really magical in that story about, well, you know, people are people.
Deb Newbold is a storyteller that she's a professional storyteller. I met her at a music festival because she was doing some workshops that I signed up for, and she's great. And she believes in the idea of the spoken word. That idea of you tell a story and then you move on, and you might tell the same story to a different audience and it'd be completely different. And she never writes stuff down, because I was saying, do you write this stuff down, because the stories that you tell are lovely, and some of them are really rude as well. They're great. And she said, no, she said, I just try and respond to the audience that's in front of me. So her powers of sensory acuity in terms of kind of working out what's going on in the room are really good. So yeah, I mean, check her out. I'm sure she'll have a website, or she'll be on Face Tweet or whatever it's called. Do you know those?
Facebook, Steve, Facebook.
Socialist media, whatever it is.
Ooh, look at that, Steve. Rather political there on a Friday morning, right?
I was being down with the kids.
Yeah. Well, we've also got 4 lovely people tuning in at the minute, which is wonderful.
Hello, 4
and
of you.
good morning, Tony, and good morning, Marita. And
Hello.
Marita just said, great story. So thank you very much for that. And I think when again, we've said this before, me and Steve get together on a Thursday morning and we have a bit of a chat and a bit of a catch up. And we also think, what are we going to talk about on Friday? What are we going to share with the wonderful folk that tune in, and also the wonderful folk who watch this after Friday, whenever they might watch it on YouTube? And it was that thing for me, Steve, around that NLP being a system. And I think what we've done over the last 10 episodes is introduce people to different concepts and different tools, from Mercedes model through to timelines, through to some of those meta programs that we talked about. And then we were just sat there going, well, episode 11 really allows us to bring some of that together and just have a bit more of a free-flowing chat about it being much more integrative. I can't say
Intricate.
Integrative.
Integrated.
Integrated. That's the word. Integrated. Thank you. So this is why we work well together, because it's just, nothing was going. That was a long story, Steve. That was a very long story. So
That's fine.
being tongue-tied, I'm sure would is part and parcel after a long story.
But just imagine 4 other people screaming at their screens. Integrated.
And good morning, Jacqueline, who's also joining us. So how we can just integrate those tools and techniques so that it's more of a system.
Yeah.
Because I find that a little bit so as someone who's spent the last 5 years being really immersed in NLP, and at the same time starting a journey of supporting people with one-to-one stuff and coaching and all that kind of stuff, I think I find that a little bit tricksy to just kind of formulate in my head, even though I know NLP is a system. It's a process. It's a way of integrating a load of things together. That good old phrase of lob a load of stuff and something will stick.
Yep.
Sometimes I find it really difficult. So I wondered whether you'd be willing to just share some thoughts and some words of wisdom and around this all, because you've been doing one-to-one stuff for a lot longer, haven't you? And you've been
Is this revenge for integrated? Just drop me in it. Thank you very much, mate.
But yeah, I just think you've got a bit more experience, a lot more experience in doing that one-to-one stuff. And did you ever feel that way? Did you ever feel? Because I remember we were having this chat yesterday, and I was a bit like, it doesn't feel as integrated to me. It feels very lopsided at times, and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes it feels like I'm doing counseling and not necessarily NLP, and sometimes I feel like I'm doing something else and not necessarily NLP. And then I remember you were saying that actually it's about it being a system, and all of these things actually flow into one another. And I know that not everyone listening will be NLPs. Some of them might be counselors or therapists or other sort of other types of change workers. So did you ever struggle with that kind of feeling quite, the word I'm going to use is choppy, feeling quite choppy?
Yes.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's this morning's show done.
So, yeah, I mean, the thing is that when we teach and learn NLP, we kind of do it in a very linear way. So we learn a technique, we get to find our voice with it, and we move on to the next one, or we learn a model, or we learn a bit of history of NLP, and then we move on. And I just think it works better when we start to practice it and we start seeing it as a system. And for me, that realization didn't come until I did Master Practitioner, when basically we were encouraged to sit down and have a chat and incorporate some NLP. That was the message I took from it. That NLP works best when you just do it, as part of a conversation. So it's very unintrusive. It's very gentle with people, and things start to link together because as you're having the conversation, you're not perhaps necessarily thinking about NLP, but NLP comes into it. And so what I go back to then, what is the question? Well, what's a system? And I think the best definition of a system that I came up with, and it fits this beautifully, is the idea that a system is a bunch of things that fit together in a way so that the whole is bigger than the sum of their parts. Okay, so if we think about, do you remember when Notre Dame Cathedral was burning down last year? Was it last year? Gosh, time. What's happened this year? Anyway, so you got a bunch of people, thousands of people, standing on the streets and bridges of Paris in tears, sobbing, because this collection of stones, of bits of wood, of glass, was dissolving in flames around them, and they thought it had gone forever. Many of those people perhaps had never been through the doorway of the cathedral. Perhaps many of them didn't have any religious beliefs at all, but what had happened is that building had come to signify something that was so much more than the sum of its parts. And I think NLP can do that. That when we use it in a systematic way, where we link different parts of it, we get so much more bang for our buck. It gets bigger than the sum of its parts. My old friend, Stephen Covey, my old friend, I've never met him, but I read his book. He talks about this idea as being synergy, which is quite a high, one of the highest of his 7 habits of for effective people. So systems create synergy. The sum is bigger, the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts, which is a really nice way. When you get that synergy going, it's just a lovely way of working. And I think that the origins of that come back to a guy called Gregory Bateson, that I'm sure some of you have heard of, who was a pioneer, as well as being an anthropologist, a sociologist, a philosopher, a teacher. He did all kinds of stuff, but he was also a pioneer in systems theory. And one of the things that I think he brought to the early days of NLP was the idea that we treat things as systems. And that was a very powerful influence, I think, in the early days of NLP. In the same way that one of the 3 therapists that Bandler, Grindler, and Pusely modelled was Virginia Satir, who we were talking about earlier. And she was a pioneer in family therapy. And the thing that she did differently was she treated the family as a system, rather than as a group of individuals where maybe 1 or 2 were kind of dysfunctional in that group. She said, well, actually, it's not the individuals that necessarily are dysfunctional, it's the family. So let's look at what's happening within the family. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more, Virginia Satir, next week, aren't we?
We are this Thursday evening. So for those of you that are NLPers and tuning in, please do drop me a message. And we have our monthly practice session, which will be really good. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about NLP's history, because again, we're on episode 11, and it's interesting because I think when we started this process, we thought, it'd be a really lovely way to just share some stuff. And genuinely, I don't know about you, Steve, but I didn't expect it to have momentum and to continue going. We just wanted, during that time of challenge and change in the summer, where people were just feeling a little bit at perhaps their lowest point, because it had been quite an interesting year up until that point anyway, and there didn't seem to seem any end in sight. We just wanted to share some stuff. We just thought, let's jump online and just share some stuff. And again, it was thanks to the guys at Pathlight Thrive Hive who encouraged us to do that. now this is gaining a lot of traction. And you said it before, your partner talks about bromance and all that kind of stuff, and we want to keep it going because I think we both genuinely love it. So I'm mindful that some people might watch episode 1 all the way through to episode 11, and other people might just jump on the
Wow.
call at any point and just decide to watch episode 11. So before I ask you just to give us a bit more of that history of NLP, because I always love it. I always love hearing about it, and in particular the kind of where it came from. Again, for the people watching, please do chip in with your thoughts and comments around systems change and about what Steve said already. Have you had any experiences of it? And if so, share, because I think that's what we want this call to be, is myself and Steve sharing this stuff. At the same time, we want you to be sharing some stuff as well. So please share your thoughts, comments, observations, questions you might have on systems. So you mentioned Bandler, Grinder, and Puselic isn't often mentioned in my understanding of NLP, but I know it's quite important when you're training NLP, Steve. So from what I know, 1970s, California was a place where interesting things were happening, and interesting consumptions were also happening, if we can put it that way. And I don't know whether these three gents, I don't know if you know, I don't know if these three gents had any of that consumption. I'm talking about weed, by the way.
They were into everything, I think.
Wow, okay, yeah.
And I've got to be careful, because who knows if Richard Bandler is watching?
Exactly. I'm genuinely, Mr. Bandler, from the two of us, huge respect, because it has been transformational. So what happened then? So who were these dudes, Bandler and Grinder? Sorry, Mr. Bandler, if you're watching again, that I called you a dude.
Well, first of all, I think, do you know how such a lot of NLP is context related?
Yes.
So, for example, I have quite a strong auditory preference, except when I'm going. Do you remember the days when we used to be able to go out for a meal? And then in the context of a restaurant, what I want to be is, and what I concentrate on being, is having that gustatory, olfactory stuff, so I can really enjoy the smells and the taste and that kinesthetic of the delicious food and the visual of seeing it arrive at the table. So auditory, yeah, forget it. Do you know, in the context of eating out, nah. I don't care what music's playing. I don't care on the waitress's accent. I just want to get involved. Okay, so let's think about a little bit about the context of what was happening in the USA around about the early 70s that that kind of, I guess, must have had an influence somehow in how NLP was formulated and developed.
Is that was the 70s a time of Reagan? Was that Reagan, or was it, or is that not what you're talking about? Are you talking politically, context-wise, or are you talking about?
So Reagan was the 80s.
80s, okay.
I think Nixon was around in the. I think it was Nixon in the 70s, wasn't it? Nixon and Ford, and later on, Jimmy Carter as well.
Okay.
No,
but is that what you're talking about, Steve? So when you talk about context, you're saying politically, but also societally, economically, kind of what was happening?
Because it was a product of
circumstance.
Culture, yeah. But there was a lot of, I mean, socially, there's a lot of stuff going on. So civil rights were coming up. Something called feminism. Who knew? That was kind of becoming, again, using your phrase, it was kind of starting to really gain traction. There was gay rights was starting to be talked about openly. We were not far off from the invention of punk. George Lucas was kind of devising Star Wars. There was something called the Vietnam War going on.
Yeah.
So it was President Johnson at that stage, I think. So Lyndon Johnson might have been the president.
Johnson,
yeah, at that time. And there was also.
Can I just say though, huge congratulations to the folks over in the States. Just as soon as you mentioned Lyndon B. Johnson's name, I just thought fabulous. And apologies, I've just taken you off track there, Steve, but if if what has happened over in the States continues to happen, I think they're in a pretty good position.
Cool.
Let's now
But
move
again,
on.
you know, the context for Trump was part of the context, as well as kind of setting an agenda.
Yeah.
The context for Trump was also really important. Anywho, where was I? Can't remember.
Sorry, you were saying Vietnam
yeah.
War?
Yeah, all that was going on. So the anti-war protests, there was lots of stuff going on, lots of social upheaval, really. The Summer of Love had been gone. Kennedy and Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And one of the things that was happening was a real explosion in the ideas of talking therapy and people exploring different stuff. So in the middle of all this, the University of California kind of opens this new campus at a place called Santa Cruz, which I think I'm right in saying is on the coast, but back from the coast in the hills. And apparently it's a beautiful campus set in pine forests on the slopes leading down to the Pacific Ocean. And the idea there was they wanted to do something a little bit new, getting away from the typical model of professors and students. And so they encouraged the staff to kind of participate in different courses. So if you were a maths professor, you were encouraged to kind of get involved with sociology or English or anthropology, whatever. And the idea was that the students too were encouraged to become teachers, which I think is just a lovely way of kind of thinking about education. So the dividing line between who's the teacher and who's the learner got blurred, got transferred, and it made for a very, very creative atmosphere where people could experiment with different things, including mind-altering substances, which again was part of that context of the early 70s. Anywho, so in the middle of all this, Richard Bandler arrives as a postgrad in psychology and starts running Gestalt therapy groups with groups of students, which go really well. And one of his professors, John Grinder, hears about this and starts turning up. And he's a linguist. Grinder's a linguist, so he starts analysing what Bandler's saying. And what he realizes that he's effective because of the words he's using and the way he's using them. So the two of them get their heads together and say, well, okay, what exactly is going on here that makes what you're doing so effective? Yeah, so they decided, well, okay, this is what you do. What are other people doing? And that gave them the idea of modeling, and the idea of really looking in depth and in detail, fine chunk at therapists who were really, really good at what they were doing, so that we got not only not so much the if you like, the idea behind the therapy, but that linguistic content that is the difference that makes the difference. So Milton Erickson using the metaphor and stories in order to kind of make enable real change, because his therapy suddenly becomes deeply personal, which of course it needs to be. So that's where they kind of came from. And Frank Puslik was part of that early group. And my understanding is that there was a bit of an issue about basically who was going out with who. And there was a clash of alpha males that resulted in poor old Frank heading off to Canada, where you could say that he became perhaps the first NLP practitioner, because he took the stuff that he'd been working on the meta model, especially across the border into Canada, and started using what he'd learned with veterans that were coming back from Vietnam. In the meantime, I think Richard Bandler married Frank Puslik's girlfriend. Anyway, there you all go. So
and we have to say, just in case Mr. Bandler is listening, that Steve's important word there was apparently. So he's not saying you did, Mr. Bandler. He's saying apparently you married Puslik's girlfriend.
Yeah, I mean, what is on record is the murder trial.
Ooh, that sounds interesting.
Mm,
But I think we should leave that for another day, just to get people
okay,
tuning back in. It's a lovely cliffhanger, isn't it? The murder trial. Hey,
there you go.
that is a lovely cliffhanger. So so
But
I'll
yeah,
read. Sorry, go on, Steve.
I was going to say, so in all this, they kind of also, Bandler, Grindler, Pusely met Gregory Bateson. Grinder was also, from what I can make out, he was also very, very interested in the idea of systems and how they worked. And again, my understanding is that he was taught by Bateson. Gregory Bateson had a huge impact because he was a close friend of Milton Erickson, and he introduced them to Erickson, and opened the door for them to sit for hours with Milton Erickson, kind of analysing what he did and trying to pick his brains, which apparently wasn't that easy, because Erickson was just, well, this is what I do, you know. It's no great theory.
Yeah,
People come through
yeah.
the door, they tell me a little bit about their lives. I use that and I weave some stories into it that suggest some change might be done under trance. Great.
And I love that, Steve. So Tony's written a couple of comments, and I'll read them in a sec. I love that about the fact of two things. It's modeling. So, you know, if I was to ask you, Steve, how do you do such wonderful training? I don't think naturally you'd be able to tell me how you do it. You just go, well, I just do it. I just it's one of those
You
things.
take some stuff and do it, don't you?
If someone asked me how do you work with young people really well, I'd be like, well, you just work with them, you know. I don't see what the difficulty is, or what the kind of question is about. So that whole thing about modeling, and I'm not surprised that Milton Erickson went, I have no idea what I do. I just do it.
Well, I'm putting words in his mouth there.
Because
I'm
well,
sure he did have an idea of what he was doing, because he was a very clever guy.
absolutely. And at the same time, Steve, there is something about if we do something so well,
Yeah.
you know, that there are parts of our life that we do so well, or perhaps so unconsciously, driving, for example. So I don't know about people, but I often end up in a car, and if I know in particular where I'm going, I'm there and I'm like, what? How? What? How did that happen? You know, and so if someone was to say to me now, well, actually, how do you, for example, get to Steve's house? I just go, well, I get there. Not that I've been sat outside your house, Steve, just stalking. It's because I've come quite a few times.
Remember what the judge said?
So it is that thing about modeling. And I think the other thing for me, what I love about NLP, is that because Banlan Grinder modeled people, for me, it's basically telling us what humans do really well. So it's that premise of human excellence. And so therefore, it's not anything necessarily new that we're learning. All we're doing is going, how do we bring that to our conscious awareness? How do we become more consciously aware? Which was wonderful for me, because it meant, you know, as someone who didn't particularly feel as someone who didn't particularly feel confident in learning new things, for me it felt amazing. I'm not learning anything new. What I am doing is I'm now, and I say this all the time, I've got this framework which goes, that's why I'm different to Steve in some ways, and that's why me and Steve are similar, and it's that makes, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to read a couple of comments from Tony, because as we know, Tony is has been a lifelong NLPer, has been immersed in NLP for a long time. And in actual fact, you might know this, Steve, but Tony was in the USA around the 70s.
Oh, right.
So he's written, I was in the USA in 1968, demonstrated against the Vietnam War at a Nixon rally. So you're right. And saw him elected as president. Yuck. It was a time of international change. So the 70s was in the wake of huge disruption globally, and a perfect time for NLP to come about. I've just written about this in my memoir. So that'll be very interesting to read at some point. Oh, see, now that you said, people are probably shouting at the screen because I couldn't say that word. Tony's going to put it in this next comment of his. And
go for it.
I've rarely used NLP as a standalone therapy because I've
integrated
it into all my work as a humanistic therapist and psychosexual therapist. The context defines everything.
Yeah.
So we're right. You know, we're absolutely about that context thing.
Yeah. And you know, NLP is a bunch of tools, but our toolboxes are huge. So the more tools we have in there, the more flexible we become, and the more flexible we become, the more effective.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, do you know, that idea of kind of people being sort of familiar with what they're doing anyway, because I think a lot of NLP is it takes a situation and it gives us a chance to just kind of slow it down and deconstruct it, get some meaning from it, and then reconstruct it in a way that kind of makes sense. So I was thinking about the last training I did was a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing the perceptual positions. And I can remember one woman saying, yeah, I already do this instinctively. I just do it, which is great, because that means that this person has something to do, a gift of empathy, perhaps, that she's able to kind of try and understand people from their point of view. And I suppose we all do that to a certain extent. And what I like about the NLP is that it takes that idea that I kind of do something that helps me understand where the other person's coming from, but I'm not quite sure what I do. And so something like the perceptual positions, it kind of really slows it down.
Yeah.
You do that little dance around the 3 positions, and at the end of it, you come out thinking, okay. So not only can I apply that to that particular situation where I'm having a row with my boss or my partner or whatever, but it kind of gives me a little bit of insight into, yeah, this is how I do it anyway in similar situations. And now, because I understand how it works, I can do it a little bit better. So it kind of generates that idea of, you can generate strategies that go beyond your immediate circumstance and go into something else, building on what people are doing already.
And like I said, Steve, for me as well, it's that thing about just having greater insight. So I think there were two things as I continue to reflect on my NLP journey. There were 2 elements that really struck out to me. One is stuff around timelines and understanding people's time preference, and being much more accepting of that. Much more accepting of that, and going, right, okay, well, this is how, and being able to actually now have a bit of a humorous kind of way of being with people around when it comes to timeline preferences. So I remember we saw each other a couple of weekends ago, and Catherine, your partner, typically has a very strong in-time preference.
Be careful what you're going to say right now.
And so to see her at the course, 15 minutes early, which typically for Catherine might not be the case if she was perhaps doing it alone, we're just, we can be quite humorous with each other, and she can be humorous. Yeah, well, that was it. And so she, you can be a bit more humorous with each other. You can be a bit more accepting. You can be a bit more understanding. You can go, oh, let's just have a bit of a laugh about that thing, rather than getting yourself really worked up. And I think I mentioned to you on another call, I went out for dessert. This was just before this new lockdown came into effect, with a friend and her children. And so we were talking about timeline, and they went, oh, thanks, Jaff, thanks, because that explains Dad. And all the time we're getting so angry at him. But now we can just be a lot more calmer. We can just be like, well, that's just Dad. And I asked my partner, I asked my friend how long had she been married to her partner for. 22 years.
Okay, congratulations, well done.
So, for 22 years, bless her, she had this kind of underlying frustration, was her word, around, why can't he just be on time? Why, when we say something, why can't it just be on time? And again, if you want to know more about the time stuff, there are a couple of episodes that we've recorded that you can look back on. I think for me, the other thing were the NLP presuppositions. So what I call the statements of intent. There are a set of belief systems, aren't there? And actually, if you can view the world through those belief systems, and it's not always easy, at the same time, if you can do it, it just makes life so much more understanding. And some of them, again, I think people probably implement as part of their routine naturally and organically. Kind of, it's kind of like, yeah, I think that way anyway. That's kind of how I've always thought. So stuff around the one that I've loved recently is there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Because how many times do we perhaps do something, whether it's a one-to-one session or whether we, take an exam or all that kind of stuff, and we failed, we failed. To turn that into its feedback, there's something there about just take the learning from it and implement that as feedback is such a different way to view the world and to view yourself in the world, to view your kind of presence and your role within the world.
So you just described the presuppositions as a belief system, which is not how I see them actually. So tell us more about that.
So having spent quite a bit of time reading through the presuppositions, for me, I believe that if you take them on board as a belief system, as a way to see the world and as a way to kind of view yourself in the world through them, then I think it makes your world, it makes your life, you in control and you at the center of that. Because again, going back to our wonderful friend Stephen Covey, the only people we're in control of is ourselves. And the only situations that we're in control of are the ones that we have control over. And I also believe that it's a way to really think about how you can develop yourself and develop your relationships with other people. So I've got them around. The reason why I'm looking up is because I've got them. I've got these wonderful cards around my desk. But stuff like mind and body are one system. Well, if I take that as a belief system, that my mind and body are one system, well, when my body is giving me a message, whether that's aches or pains, or whether that's at one point my appendix coming out and a couple of years later my gallbladder coming out, well, actually, I believe that's my mind giving me a message through my body.
Yeah.
Going, you need to slow down, young lad. You need to slow down because this is not going to end well. We've taken away a couple of body parts which perhaps are not of major use to you, and at the same time other body parts could come out which will have a detrimental impact on you. Stuff around, you cannot not communicate. So to take that on as a belief system, that I'm always communicating, and in particular in this new online world where we're on video calls and meetings online, and so the fact that you're constantly communicating, giving out some sort of message, whether that be through your body language. Energy flows where attention goes. Taking that on as a belief system, that actually, if I believe that where I put my energy, well, that's where my attention is going to go. And if I can flip that, so if I put my energy into positive things, into things that nurture me, into things that develop me, well, actually, that's where my attention will go. So for me, it's kind of the first way I describe them is statements of intent, because I think there's an intention behind all of them, and they're a beautiful set of statements. And I've started to move into this idea that they could be used as a belief system as well.
That's really interesting, because I know you, because of the way you've set up your room with so you've got really strong anchors with the presuppositions. Because I kind of I really understand what you're saying, and I've always thought of the presuppositions more as like starting points. So when I'm doing the NLP training, and we're looking at the presuppositions, and what we try and do is we set it up so that the group gets a chance to debate each one over the 4 days of the foundation course, and we just have 5-10 minutes on each one, just kind of teasing out what it means for the people in the room. And it's great because every time we do it, we learn something new about it, because people just see it from slightly different points of view. And at the end of it, to close the debate, because we got to move on, we could talk about, for example, people behave perfectly. We could do 4 days on that, but we don't have 4 days on that. So at the end of it, I always say, and always remember, these are just starting points. So useful questions to have around them were, if this was true, what must be happening in that person's mind to make this the case? So a contentious one, like, you know, people behave perfectly, or I forget the exact wording. You've got it in front of you.
People work perfectly.
People work perfectly. Yeah. Okay. So what must be happening in their minds for this to hold true? And it's just a starting point. For me, I kind of see them as a set of benchmarks, saying, well, okay, if people worked perfectly, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, for starters. So let's just see what is preventing that perfection happening. And whose perfection, by the way? And as Tony has just said, you know, perfection is dependent on the context. So what context are we talking about for this to be in? So for me, I kind of see it as rather than as a set of beliefs, although some of them are, and you know, they chime very much with my personal belief systems and values. For the purpose of working with other people, either as a trainer or in a therapy role, for me, they're kind of like benchmarks as well that say, okay, if this is true, what's going on here? So how can this be true at the same time? I'll give you an example, right? So I was talking to my mum on the phone last night, and she's in a care home. In a couple of weeks' time, she's going to be 94. I hope she's not watching, but there's very little chance of that. She's 94 in a few weeks' time, and she's having a rough time. She really is having a rough time. She's not enjoyed lockdown. And what's happening now is that because every day is the same, that she's losing track of days. So we had 55 minutes last night where she reeled off a whole bunch of stuff about what was wrong with her life. And some of it related to stuff that we'd sorted out a year ago. But for her, it was there in the moment. And she hasn't got a diagnosis of dementia or anything like that. So this was just her trying to make sense of her timeline as well. And at the end of 55 minutes, she kind of paused for breath, which was great. And I said, so is there anything good going on in your life at the moment? She said, well, what do you mean? And she said, there's lots of good stuff. I said, well, for 55 minutes now, you have barely paused for breath, just telling me the stuff that's going wrong at the moment, some of which happened last year and has been sorted, and we don't really need to worry about it. So I just left her with the idea that, okay, when you do this continual rehashing of the past so that you focus on the bad stuff, then how does it make you feel? And I just wonder why you're choosing that, because there's lots of other stuff that happened in your life that was really positive. And just, you know, a little bit of a challenge in there as well. So, Mum, you know, there's good stuff happening. Why? Let's see if we can have a conversation later on in the week or whatever, where we're just able to talk about stuff that's been positive in your life. It was really strange, actually. She said, oh, I've taken up far too much of your time. I better go now. I was like, no, it's fine. Don't worry. It's good. But it was like, there was a real discomfort about, what would I talk about if you know, life wasn't as bad as it actually is? But she's getting something. She got an hour of my attention by rehashing past crises that weren't crises then or now. And and maybe it was a way of making sense of the confusion that she's feeling around her personal timeline.
And that, for me, that goes back to that presupposition of all behavior as a positive intention.
Yeah.
So whilst for you, it might not be a positive in the sense of you going, oh, come on, Mom, there is other stuff to be thinking about, you know, out there. And for her, actually, like you said, her positive intention could have been, well, actually, I get an hour of uninterrupted time. and it just gives me a chance
Tick that
perhaps to
box.
reflect on whatever's happened, and if I feel a little bit down, I can just continue to add to that. And again, this is the thing that I love about NLP, is that as far as I'm concerned, so this is in my world, there is no right or wrong.
Yeah,
So whether they're a set of belief
absolutely.
systems or whether they're a set of starting points, and the chances are that they are both to some people. So when I look at these cards, not all of them are integral. I did it. Integral, I'll just use that word, are not always integral to my, stop laughing, Steve, are not integral to my belief system. There are some, like you said, that resonate really, really strongly with me. And then I still see that point, because I remember helping you on one of your foundations when you did that. And it was just, I'd be still there going, oh my gosh, I'd never seen it that way. I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and I'd never seen that presupposition in the way that such a person had just talked about it. And what a wonderful way to kind of see it from that perspective. So whether
I
it's
think they're really powerful. I think they're really good,
mm,
and it's a really good investment to put attention, especially when people are just starting to learn NLP. I think put some
yeah,
attention into what does that mean, because they're actually they're powerful statements. However you see them, and you think,
absolutely. So Marita's also written, what are the 3 positions to perceptual positions, and Tony wonderfully kind of described it. What we will do perhaps next week is talk a bit about perceptual positions, because it seems like a nice segue into that, and we can just briefly touch on that. Other things that link into that. And then Marita, you've also written, I'm interested in the time thing. I am always late. Oh, there's so much that we could do with that one statement alone, Steve. Because the thing for me is that,
hey, what time did she join us?
well, I was going to say that. So Marita was actually, interestingly, the first one to comment.
Okay.
And my other observation would be that thing about always. So perhaps there are times when one's late, and it depends on what, again, context, depends on whether it's okay to be late in that context.
Yeah.
So I just invite you, Marita, from my perspective anyway, to just think about that always, because that's quite a strong statement to say that you're always late. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Steve.
Now, we love universal quantifiers, because it only takes one time when it's not true and the whole thing crumbles to dust. So if you've ever been on time for anything, Marita, then the word always, you can't use it anymore. I'm sorry. There you go. We'll send the always police around, and
by the way, the always police just consist of me and Steve.
No, it consists of Jaffer, actually.
And then Marita was just saying, hey, wonderful news. Marita was just saying that she's looking at the Torchbeam TAD website or Facebook page, which is Steve's, so you can see it at the bottom. And Marita said she was on time. I said, Egypt about Christmas jumpers. Don't know what that means.
It means that one of us is an idiot, and I suspect she means me.
Please don't be me. See how we responded to that very differently. And again, if there are any people like Tony watching, if you want to kind of deconstruct how there was a difference in response to that. So Steve was like, who, me? And I was like, please don't call me an Egypt. I don't want that, especially around Christmas jumpers. Anyway, we've taken up too much of your time. It is 25 to 12. Oh, what an enjoyable conversation as always, Steve. So
thank you for joining us as well.
Can we?
It's really good to have you with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. We are back here next Friday and the next couple of Fridays. So we're going to get back into that routine of doing some regular sessions, which will be great, because I know during the summer there was a lot of momentum there. This has been recorded and it'll be uploaded to Facebook and YouTube within the next few hours. So thank you very, very much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
See you, folks.
Care.
Have a good week.
See you later. Bye-bye.